July, the month where the rains didn't come, the grass died, and somehow my pansies thrived. Welcome back to another garden tour. If this is your first time with us, welcome. My garden is located in southern Ontario in the GTA, and I have been documenting it month over month since the beginning of January 2020. If you want to check out the rest of them and how it has been progressing this far in the year, I'll leave a link down below. This month almost didn't get filmed. This has been a very, very challenging month in our space, and it really made me realize that gardens are like thumbprints. They're very unique and very individualized, and you can have the same plants and the same layout in two different spaces and they will not look the same. And you can glean a lot of information from the layout of somebody's space. And I really realized that as I was walking through my own space this month, having to come out and water some of the plants, and it was hard. On July 15th, one of our dogs passed away, and coming into the backyard space was very, very challenging for me to do. I was only coming out just to water. July has been an incredibly dry month. Thankfully, when he passed, we started to get more rain, so I didn't have to come out too often. But the times I did have to come were very, very challenging for me, because everywhere I look back here, I could see him. The way that we have chosen to grow all of our vegetables, the layout of the space, fencing, the way we have maintained certain things while letting other things go, nearly all of it was reflective of the occupants, whether it is us and our time, or the dog and his size and therefore his urine stream, or our other dog charging the back fence, the apples and allergies. Like, every single part of this space is a reflection of us, and we could leave and somebody else could come in and they could still have things in a very similar way, and it would not be the same space. The first half of the month was incredibly dry. We had probably a good 2-3 week stretch where the temperatures were in 30 Celsius and we got no rain whatsoever. And then once the middle of the month hit, we started to get a few storms, but it was that really heavy deluge, and the ground was so dry and so hard that a lot of the moisture was not able to be retained by the ground and was just washing away into the sewer grates. So the ground was still cracked and was still dry even though we were getting rain. So watering has definitely been one of our biggest tasks. And then because of the heat, most of our plants went dormant in both the flower gardens and also the vegetable area. Other than that, it would have normally been some pruning, and once things started to come back in and I could have gone in and deadheaded, our family was just not in the headspace to be taking on extra tasks like that. So a lot of the flowers in the front are reflective of that, and then the vegetables in the back are thriving and they're doing absolutely amazing, because the only task to really do was watering, and I was able to stay on top of that as hard as it was. We're going to jump into the vegetable garden first, and then I will take you back into the front yard space and we can explore what's happening with the flowers out front. The vegetables, though, with the heat, with the drought, they have been doing really well. The reasons that I had opted for these grow bags originally was because of our very large dog. He was very tall and he could pee on everything. So I really got sick and tired of all of my potted plants dying from the constant hit of urine. Also, the idea of direct urine on my vegetables wasn't appetizing. I bought a bunch of 55 and 65 gallon grow bags, and they have performed magnificently, especially with the prolonged stretch of dry that we had. My plants didn't experience any heat stress. A lot of times you will notice that your plants just stop, they stall, they don't grow, they don't fruit. If you have flowers, the flowers will often fall off, and a lot of that will often be heat stress on a plant. It's conserving energy, it's just trying to stay alive, and it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with your plant. You just have to kind of wait it out for the season to adjust itself and for the conditions to be more favorable for the plants, and then you'll notice it kick back into gear. And watering was much easier. The plants are, like, you can see my tomatoes have reached about 8 feet tall now, and they don't have any blossom rot. This is my first year that I have managed to get absolutely no blossom rot. I do have some cat facing on a few of them with the varying water, but I have not had any blossom end rot on my tomatoes. I did get a little bit on my peppers because they're still in smaller pots. But the tomatoes have been just doing exceedingly well. I've been pruning them along and training them up a string method up into the soffit. Now, one of the challenges that we face every single year with our garden is our dog Lucy. And as much as Monzi would do all of the peeing on the bags and kind of destroy the plants as they were growing, if they managed to make it and get fruit, our dog Lucy would then come in and begin stealing the fruit because she can tell a ripe tomato better than most humans can. And she will come in and begin to just help herself. And you can always tell it's her because it is much larger than a squirrel bite. And she comes inside smelling like a juicy tomato, and the white of her fur is typically covered in red. The flea beetles didn't seem to bother the tomatoes too much. Like the bottom leaves look atrocious, and I have even seen some on the fruit, but they don't seem to be eating the fruit. They just seem to be nibbling away on the leaves, and there's enough leaf that it's not doing any damage. The eggplant also, it looks horrible, but we're starting to finally get some flowers on there. So once again, it doesn't seem to be impeding anything. It's just more unsightly. The cucumber beetles, though, they have been kicking my ass. I've lost a few cucumber plants in one grow bag. Another one, half the plants ended up succumbing to wilt from the cucumber beetles, and then the other ones are kind of struggling along. I still haven't really gotten any flowers out of them because of it, because they're just surviving. And then the ones in here, unfortunately, they were doing a bit better, but they are so overgrown by the tomatoes that this combination, I thought the cucumbers would outgrow the tomatoes because they normally grow very quickly, and because I started them in the grow bag so late, they weren't able to get ahead. And once the heat of July hit, the tomatoes just took off, and you could see them practically growing. The peppers as well, we had started a bunch of seeds. We thought that they were going to be very hot peppers, and now that they're growing, they're definitely not spicy. They're quite large. He's eaten a few and there's no heat to them, so we still haven't quite determined what they are. They look pretty much identical to my Marconi peppers, so I don't know if I accidentally saved some from last year and then bought more seeds. I really don't know what I did, but we did something and it didn't work out quite as planned. So we're gonna have to order a bunch of seeds this year because we won't be able to save any of our own seeds. The calendula has been doing beautifully. I have been picking off the flowers and drying those so that I can start to make some like body care products with those. Our zucchini has been doing quite well. I was able to harvest at least one fruit off of that so far. Mostly male flowers have been coming out. I think also with the stress of the heat, even though it likes the heat, most of the plants were not putting out the male and the female flowers. So I've had to have some patience. We're starting to get far more female flowers now that the first few flushes of male flowers have gone. So we should hopefully be able to be harvesting a bit more there. But they, in their pots, have been really doing quite well. My gutter gardens, ironically, were quite the surprise because they have very little soil in them, so they are very exposed to switches in temperature and heat and drying out. And I was coming out and giving it at least a daily water, and I have lettuce in there right now, which is also more of a preference for being with cooler temperatures, and it thrived during the heat. It is in a part shade location. I didn't have any shade cloth or anything over it, and I was able to harvest like lovely lettuce up until a few days ago. It's now starting to bolt, and I had seeded some other ones, and those ones are now coming up, so I can haul out the first gutter and start harvesting from the second gutter. And it looks like the succession of that sowing worked out really quite nicely, which is a first for me. I normally get it all at once and then nothing else, so that was a nice little goal for this year. Sunflowers, this is typically when they are going to be in bloom, and none of my sunflowers along the back fence ended up coming into bloom this year. Last year I had some beautiful ones. Everything I sowed this year, nothing came up, whether the squirrels stole it or the seeds just didn't germinate. I'm not sure what happened there, but not one happened. The ones that are in my barrel, though, which were self-seeded by the squirrels, have all been coming into bloom, and I've had a cardinal visiting and helping himself to the free bird food. And they're small, they're well proportioned to the barrel, they're cute. They're definitely happier than the ones that I have in my containers as my little experimental, let's get some height and some color against the garage wall. And I even had one pop up in the patio pavers. Like, they are so resilient and they need absolutely no care. This thing popped up between the cracks, self-seeded by the birds, and has been growing, not necessarily thriving. It's only about so tall.
and it even got stepped on, and so it's hanging on by just the thread, and the sucker is still going. It's incredible what they are capable of. The teepee for my daughter has been doing really quite well. It has started to fill in now with all the various annuals that I had planted around, as well as the runner beans. We still don't have a lot of flowers coming on, but it is starting to get a fullness and start to climb in between all of the sticks as well. It's happening much later in the season than I expected. For whatever reason, I had anticipated it being full by mid-July, and it looks like it's going to be more of like a mid-August to end of the growing season for us. And our strawberries, after the heat wave passed and we started to get some more rains, the strawberries have started to come back as well, and we are starting to get blooms back on those, and we will probably get flowers and fruit right until September based on what has happened in previous years. The other issue that we struggle with in this space is our apple tree, and last month I had mentioned that it was doing its dropping habits, and at the time the apples were just about the size of little cherries, and they are now getting closer to the size of small plums. And we still have another 2, maybe 3 months to be dealing with this problem. This has actually been a bigger issue for us with our dog and his health, because he was allergic to apples, specifically like an apple fungus. And so we really had to stay on top of making sure that these were picked up. So our daughter is actually very helpful with this, and we have a big hole like that. The apple tree is hollow. So she'll go around now that they're a good size, and she'll collect them all in her little basket, and she'll toss them all into the trunk. And it has been an awesome activity to keep her occupied. We're just hanging out and having a lazy afternoon in the backyard. And now that we've covered the backyard space, we're going to hop out to the front and check out what's going on in the flower beds out there. So as I mentioned, in the backyard, we experienced a lot of dry weather at the beginning of July and end of June, and so most of this space really went dormant over the last few weeks. There wasn't a lot of color, there wasn't a lot of blooms. The roses held on, but even they were starting to look really quite sparse. And the end of June, beginning of July was when I had previously noticed that the space was a little bit lackluster anyway. Other than the lavender really taking on the show, as well as some of the roses, there wasn't much else happening in the garden space. So I had picked up a hydrangea last year and put it in, hoping to add a bit more color for that time period. And it's supposed to be a compact variety, but it just didn't grow. It didn't die. It just kind of sprouted a few green leaves and then stalled completely. And it has been watered religiously, but it just has not proceeded with being much of anything. It's not the happiest in my space, so we'll see if it survives year over year, but I'm not banking on it. But as much as that's struggling, last year it was a very wet year, and there were a few things that just disappeared from my garden, and I thought they were done. I thought they weren't coming back and they were over with, such as our white coneflower here. I didn't see it at all last year. I also have some salvia in the back, and same thing, I had tried to transplant it and the transplant didn't go so well, and I really wasn't upset by that because I'm not the biggest fan of salvia to begin with. And lo and behold, it came back this year, so I'm not sure if it had self-seeded and that's why. And then I noticed a black-eyed Susan that had missed being transplanted, and it came back. So it has some leaves, no flowers on it, but it has survived, so I'm probably gonna have to dig that up before it spreads in an area that I don't want it in. And then there are a few things that I did at the worst possible time. So at the beginning of the month, when things were really, really dry, I finally had a window of opportunity. So I moved and split my irises and split a hosta, and the ground was so dry and so hard that I had to pre-soak it just to be able to get a shovel into the earth. All of those elements have been doing really, really well despite all of the heat and the extremes of the weather, and it was probably the worst time of year to be doing a transplant. But then something that I planted in the spring out by the curb with the spring heath, it's fried, and it was watered throughout the dry spell, and it already had a chance to establish its roots. So I'm not going to pull it out based on how a few of the other plants have decided to come back and surprise me. I'm going to leave it alone until next spring and see what it does there. But at this point, it's looking like it is entirely toast. But this space here really becomes the highlight of the garden in July and August. It becomes a bee and butterfly little sanctuary. We have asters, and we have liatris, and we have all the coneflowers, and we've got some echinacea in there now. And this space is normally just a buzz with activity, and it gets a really nice mix of the purples and the yellows and the whites, which is a bit of my color scheme for the space. The roses will also normally carry on right until sometimes even we've got snow and I still have roses. They're all looking really shoddy right now because nothing was deadheaded or pruned. My kale, thankfully, is finally at a point. All the seed pods are dried. The birds have been loving it, not just for the aphids anymore, but they've actually been cracking into the seed pods. They've just been gathering on this buffet of kale. So instead of pulling it out and getting rid of it, I'm probably gonna, because it's way too many seeds, I'm probably gonna leave a few and put it probably out in the back by the back fence so that the birds can still access it and continue to eat, because it has been a great source of food for them by the looks of it. And I don't want to remove that from the space, but I also do not want it to continue to spend any more time out here. It is so ugly and it is so big, and I'm over it. It's an experiment and it's done. My lavender is starting to go to seed now. I still haven't pruned it. If I prune it now, I will often get a second flush of blooms towards the end of the summer. And if I leave it too long, then I may not get that. So I really do need to prune those off and use that. We did have some successful sunflowers that I planted up by the curb come in this time. So I have two that are in bloom. One has a nice good sized head, and then the other one actually produced 3 smaller heads, and they're all from the same seed pack. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but we finally have some sunflowers that I planted that managed to actually survive. And blueberries, our barrel blueberries are finally in season, and they have been really a nice treat for our daughter, just as planned. She will specifically ask to come out here to come and graze and to pick a few, and they're actually lasting a little bit longer than I thought they would. She has been coming out pretty much daily, and she's satisfied with just the few that she gets. So it looks like these 2 plants in this barrel is just the right size for kind of a 1 toddler full season snacking. And then as the plants get bigger, then they will probably be able to produce enough for a few more people. But so far this has worked out beautifully. The dianthus had all stalled with the recent heat wave that we had. And if I was on top of things, I would have come in and I would have done a bit of a prune back. And that way the next flush could have come out once the plant was no longer stressed. So you can see here that like the top half of the plants is all done and over with. And then underneath and below, we have a whole new flush of blooms starting to come through. I really do have to come through this space and prune up the roses, prune up the dianthus and the lavender, and just do a bit of a garden cleanup. And same thing with the weeds. There's been some dog strangling vine that's come over, and some garlic mustard that's also really reared its head. So there are still things that need to be done as an ongoing maintenance, and the tasks aren't really a lot, but it's just, I haven't had any motivation this month to be doing any of that. And my lilac really has been struggling with the heat. This section here is underneath quite a large overhang on the house, and so right up against the house it does not get a lot of water, and I have had to come out and make sure that the plants towards the foundation have had some moisture, because most of our weather comes from the back of the house. So with the wind patterns, sometimes this entire bed will be dry even though it's raining, just because the wind is blowing in the opposite direction. So I've had to really monitor that this year, just because of the direction of the storms and then the extended period of dry. Or last year I didn't have to water really anything at all season long. So even though it may be a low maintenance, well-established plant, there are still certain seasons where you are going to need to baby your plants a little bit more in order to get them through and keep them happy. So as much as this space here is very much a pollinator haven for my garden, I have noticed a decline in the amount of butterflies compared to previous years. I have seen lots of bees and lots of variety of the different bees as well. But when it comes to butterflies, I have only really seen one of a few different types. Now I have seen more variety this year than I have seen in previous years, so that is also exciting in itself. We've seen red admiral, white admiral, 2 different swallowtails, and this week we finally saw our first monarch butterfly flittering through. But it has been a bit disappointing in the lack of butterflies that we've been seeing, but also very promising with the amount of bees that we have been seeing. And there have been lots of moths. So, you know, it could just be reflective of it's still early in the season and there's still time for them to come around. I'm hopeful that with the liatris coming into bloom and the coneflowers and the echinacea, that we will start to see a few more coming into the space. If you missed any of our previous months, make sure to click this playlist up here. And if you have any questions regarding any of the plants that you may have seen throughout the space that I didn't highlight in this video, feel free to drop me a comment down below and I can respond there. Thanks for watching.